York in the 70s was a marvelous place. It was big, it was dirty, it was noisy, everything that you can think of that was wrong. And we loved it. We loved being a New Yorker because the country was split, still split about Vietnam. Watergate was coming out, but New Yorkers then, as always, pulled together. And you felt at that time, I always felt I was part of something greater than being an individual. I was a New Yorker, which gave me credentials for being hardy and street smart and a survivor. And I think that's what I took away and what I took with me.
I was in New York most of the 60s into the mid-70s, and actually I still have a place in New York. But I've been through a lot of apartments, but never one as nice as this set in this show. The first one was like a floor through that I rented with another lady. A friend of mine, a photographer, had introduced us, and we both needed to share an apartment. And it was not far from the 72nd Street subway station, and it was like a floor through with a big open patio that was like half the size of, well, it was twice as big as my apartment. And there was a recording studio in this hotel behind us. I mean, lots of different people were recording Christmas carols in July, so it was an amazing space.
The Upper West Side was a very interesting place to be. There were a lot of not really counterculture people that lived there, but it was a mixture of old, established neighborhoods, a lot of pre-war buildings, and at the same time, there were a lot of apartments that were being opened for rent. And on the Upper West Side and in Greenwich Village were the apartments that most people really preferred, certainly young people, young families that wanted to live in Manhattan. And so there was a lot of competition for them in those days.
I was a proofreader at Newsweek, and so on the Newsweek phone, I said, I want to report a refrigerator that's exuding gas, and I need somebody to come and take it away. And they said, get your boyfriend. And I said, I don't have a boyfriend. Well, that's too bad. You know, and I'm saying, but I think it's probably poisoning the neighbors. We don't handle that stuff. Get it down to the curb and somebody will take it away. So I had to live there until some friends moved out of a loft. It was a floor-through loft, and I had to pay them some key money, but it was giant. It was Teddy Roosevelt's old guest house on 21st Street between Broadway and Park Avenue South. And the back door was like the top of the building. It was as big as the apartment, but kind of stray cats would come there and smell what I was cooking for dinner. And it had a washing machine, so I didn't have to carry my laundry to the laundromat. I was just in seventh heaven in that apartment.
I now presently live at 118th Street in Manhattan. That used to be, when I first moved there, a place the taxi cabs wouldn't even go to. I'd have to take a taxi from the theater district all the way up to 110th Street, get out of that cab, get into a livery cab, go 8 blocks to my house, get out, and have the cab wait till I get inside so nobody robbed me. But now, you see wonderful little white ladies riding down the streets on 2-wheel bicycles and flower pot and sun hats. It's totally bizarre.
I don't remember how much rent we paid, but it wasn't much. I was splitting the rent with 2 other guys. There were a couple floors in the place which were sort of like a halfway house for ex-cons, so those were the neighbors.
I don't know if Sinatra was singing, if you can make it there, you'll make it anywhere at that time, but it certainly was true. And it was also a zenith, I think, for New York, because it was before the city went broke. It was a time of great music. You started hearing these great punk bands, and the village was alive, and there was great jazz, and you know, my mother had a lot of trouble keeping me at home.
Near Gramercy Park, a rent-controlled apartment, $62.43 a month. And it had been totally decorated by these gay decorators who had giant lamps, and the furniture filled the room, and burlap walls. It was so weird. And it was 3 teeny tiny rooms, and the catch was that the bathroom, the toilet was in the hall, and the bathtub was in the kitchen.
I remember my grandmother used to buy these cookies on the street from this Italian man. They were twists. They were kind of fat at one end, and they would sort of be bent over and twisted around, and skinny ends. And they were just like a biscuit cookie. And I've been trying to find them at Italian bakeries ever since. And I still haven't found them. They're just not right. But my grandmother used to always have those. She lived across the parkway from us. We lived in an apartment in a building called the White Hall, which sounds fancy, but wasn't. And she lived across the parkway. We had one of these bridges that, you walk up on one side and go across and down on the other direction, right across the parkway. And it was right there.
I've explored all over, and I've lived in many, many different apartments. Unfortunately, when I came there to live, they had a lot of segregation, and many apartments that I wanted to rent, I couldn't. They'd always tell me things like, the super owns that apartment, or it's rented already, even though it's been vacant for a year. And I remember they used to have people on the news go with little cameras in their pockets to check and see if they were really rented. So they'd have a white couple go and they would rent it, they'd have a black couple go and they'd say it's already rented, and the NAACP started busting. But I love that about New York, because in California, where those kinds of problems were hidden or behind the scene, in New York, they're right in your face. So you don't have to worry about who likes you and who doesn't. You know it right away. So I love that.
3 doors down from the building, I remember there was a great little delicatessen. It was called the Spotlight Cafe. 2 older guys owned the place and ran it. One of them retired, and the other guy was an ex-cop. And he sold his life story to television, and it became Kojak.
A friend said he had somebody moving out of their rent-controlled building, and it was $75 a month. And I was so excited to get a rent-controlled apartment. And we knocked down a wall, and I moved in and then came back to California. And I still have that. I'm part owner of the building. We had to go on a rent strike because the landlord wouldn't fix the hot water or the heat. I've stayed in Los Angeles mostly, but I still go back to my little place in New York, occasionally to do a show, sometimes just to see all the Broadway shows.
In this play, Bob Randall gave us a perfect snapshot of life in New York, trying to find, you had affordable housing. You could still find rent-controlled apartments, which is a big thing, but you still had traffic. You still had all the woes of a big city, but there was nowhere else that you really wanted to live. I think I felt that way, and I think a lot of people felt that way. And I miss it. I still miss it. And no matter how long I'm away or where I've lived in other cities, other countries since, to me, New York City is still and always be home. I'm a Bronx girl, and right off of the 1-2, and shall be till the day I die.